Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a different kind of video from what I normally do. As you can see from the title, this is going to be more of a discussion-y video, specifically on plot twists in thrillers and how I guess plot twists and how I predict thrillers using The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter as an example. I don't normally make discussion videos. I don't really feel comfortable sitting here just discussing a broad topic. It's more natural for me to just talk specifically about books and specifically review them and not just discuss thrillers and plot twists and predictions and all of that. So I don't know how well this video is going to go. I have planned it. I do have notes that I'm working off of. So if you see me looking down over here, that's because that's where all my notes are. But I am going to try to make this as coherent as possible. I'm just not sure how it's going to turn out because this is a new kind of video for me. First of all, I do want to say I'm going to be discussing The Good Daughter in great detail. I'm going to be discussing all the plot twists, all the spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled for The Good Daughter, I'm going to have a timestamp that you should just go to in the video to avoid spoilers, because the first half of this video I'm going to be discussing how I guess the plot twists in this book. And then for the second half of the video, I'm going to be discussing just plot twists in general and predicting them in general and how I do it. So I'm going to leave the timestamp both on the screen and in the description, so definitely go to that if you don't want spoilers. And if you don't care about spoilers, just continue watching. First of all, I did just want to say that I'm making this video because it's interesting to me. I don't know how many other people are going to be specifically interested by this, because I do know not everyone likes to guess endings of thrillers, but it's something that I'm kind of good at, and not ridiculously amazing, but it's just slightly above average good at it, and I like predicting the endings. It's fun to me. So that's kind of why I'm making this video. If it's not interesting to anyone else, that's fine, but it does fascinate me to explore how I do these things, and also it's kind of a humble brag because I don't know, I'm vaguely impressed with myself sometimes, and that's okay. But okay, The Good Daughter, to get back into what the video is. I probably won't be holding this up the whole time just because there's a light directly over there, so I'm sure this is painfully shiny. I can kind of see the reflection, but also I'm just lazy. So this may come up at various points. First of all, this is where we get into the spoilers, so if you're still with me, please leave if you don't want spoilers. I wanted to start with kind of explaining what I didn't guess, because I did guess kind of the major plot twist at the end, and I guessed that from the first chapter of the book, or the first/second chapters of the book, depending on what you consider the big spoiler to be. Things I didn't guess was, I didn't guess that Sam was alive, because I already knew that in advance. I was spoiled for that, which I'm kind of bummed about, because that's something I wish I hadn't known. I don't know if I would have guessed that or not. I easily could have, because while I was reading, I did specifically notice that she never once said Sam was dead. Slaughter would always say, the mother was shot and killed, or the mother and Sam were shot, but she never specifically stated that Sam was shot and killed. So that's something that I actively noticed. But I don't know if I noticed that because I'd already been told, or because I'm someone who notices those things. Because definitely in the past, I've noticed things like that, but also that could be easily something that I just take for granted in a book, that I just assume, oh, Sam must be dead as well, and then continue on. So I really can't say whether I would have guessed that or not, but I did get spoiled for that, so I just wanted to explain that and how I approached that at the beginning. The thing that I did guess, and I'm a bit removed from this book. I read this in October, and I'm now filming this video in December, so I don't remember anyone's names except for Sam and Charlie. But the thing that I guessed was that the man Sam slept with in the second chapter, which was after there was the prologue and then the first chapter, so I guessed it in the first chapter. I guessed that man was the second shooter. Literally from the moment he was introduced, I was oh, he's the second shooter. Because in the first chapter, I had already guessed that the second shooter was not who we thought it was. I'm going to stick closely to my notes because that's the only way I can think of to say this coherently. There are two main reasons that I guessed that was him very, very early on, just immediately knew it was him. The first is that his reaction to her identity seemed over the top. It seemed ridiculous. It seemed oh my god, I can't believe you are that. person. Like, oh my god, like this is insane. Like, I can never speak to you again. Whereas before he'd been like kind of flirty, kind of nice. And it seemed very over the top. Even though I know that her father in this book is a lawyer, the town hates her father, and a lot of people hate her by association. But even for that, it seemed over the top. And when she asked if that was the reason, he said no. Which, again, could have just been like a red herring type thing. But it seemed off, even for this story, even for the setting that they were in. And I figured there was something else going on. The second reason is that I knew there had to be some sort of secret in the past. They wouldn't have kept cutting back to the past and discussing the past constantly if there hadn't been some sort of secret that was like intrinsic there, like something that the reader doesn't know, something that has yet to be explored. It seems like a very clear-cut backstory from Charlie's point of view. It seems like, oh, like this terrible thing happened for this specific reason. Like this man and his brother came to kill my father over some unpaid bills that they had and wound up shooting my mother and sister instead. And but that can't be as clear cut as it seems like it is because the past has to have some kind of relevance in the future. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a part of the story. It would just be like mentioned instead of getting all these flashbacks and all these specific discussions on the past. There has to be some unknown there. There has to be some unknown factor that changes things. Otherwise, it's just not going to be a compelling thriller. Otherwise, you've got this random piece of information that doesn't make any sense. So then you can look at specifically what we know, even that early on in the story. What we know is that the identity of the one shooter. He takes off his mask, she sees his face. We know for a fact who he is. The second thing we know is the reason for that one killer. We know why he's there, we know what he wants. We know that the mother died. And we think we know the identity of the second killer. We think we know who he is. But if you look at the actual facts of the situation, his identity isn't a fact. We assume because he's called brother, but he never takes off his mask. So we never know for sure. And for a book like this, if something isn't a certainty, if something isn't an actual fact that we see and we have proved, it's going to be up in the air. There's going to be a question mark there. Realistically, looking at those facts, I can assume that the one thing that is not an absolute certainty is the thing that isn't true. And that's kind of immediately what I went with. I do want to add that this thought process while I'm reading the book is not always linear or conscious. It's just something that happens like behind the scenes. Like I don't understand my reasoning until later. It's just that I get hunches and then when I go back, I can see the reasons why I thought certain things. I also want to add that in the prologue, the first time we're seeing the two of them, it's immediately questionable, at least to me, that we never see the face of the second shooter. Zachariah Culpepper pulls off his mask. We see his face. We know for a fact it's him. And at that point, it makes no sense why the other person doesn't take off their mask unless they still think there's a chance in not being identified. And if it really was Zachariah's brother, they wouldn't have any reason to kind of like still be hiding their identity because if Zachariah got fingered for the crime, they would be the next suspect. So that's just something that I immediately thought while reading it. But also, there's a specific line in the prologue where Zachariah calls him, I forget what the exact phrasing is, something like rich boy sack of shit or something along those lines. And I was like, wait, if that was his brother, he wouldn't be calling him a rich boy. Like, it was just like very obvious that it didn't fit. And I was like, oh, that's a different person. Like, very clearly that cannot be his brother. And I know that's like an easy thing to not pick up on, but also it was just one of those things that was too painfully obvious. Like, even with everything else, I probably still would have guessed it, but that was just a painfully obvious, like, clue to, like, that's not his brother. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called him, like, a rich piece of shit or whatever he said. The second thing, the reason that the girls do think it's Zachariah's brother is because to his face, he calls him brother. He's like, we're doing this together, brother. But I don't know, even that, like, didn't strike me as odd. Like, immediately when reading that, I was like, that doesn't prove that it's the brother. Like, plenty of people call each other brother when they aren't literally siblings. That's just a thing that a lot of people say that's fairly normal. It's like saying bro. Like, people say it to people who aren't literally their brothers just because it's kind of a term of endearment. Like, in a very, like, masculine way. But it's a term of endearment to people who are friends or people you're relying on in a situation. So, it just immediately, from the prologue, I didn't think it was his brother, and then from the first chapter, I assumed it was the man from the first chapter who one of the main characters slept with. I will say, I did not guess that he was the boy whose sister killed herself after being raped. I didn't catch that at all until it was explicitly stated in the story. That did come as a surprise, but that didn't make me like backtrack anything I thought. I was just like, oh, well, now he has a motivation for doing this. He wasn't just friends with Zechariah, he was trying to get back at the lawyer guy. So I kind of figured that, and then everything I learned after the first 2 chapters just cemented it in my mind even more. So, okay, this is where I welcome back the people who didn't want spoilers, I guess, because now that we're done with the spoiler section for The Good Daughter, I'm going to talk just in general about thrillers and predicting plot twists and all of that. I do want to say, I didn't make this video to trash The Good Daughter in any way. I really enjoyed that book. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was well done. I love Karen Slaughter, and I gave that book 4 stars. I just thought it was an interesting example and a very popular example that I was able to guess the ending for. Because if I picked something obscure, then no one would watch that beginning section of this video. So it was just a good example to use there, but I really did love that book, and if you are coming back to me now, I do still recommend that book as a thriller. I thought it was really well done. Just in general, I'm good at guessing plot twists. It doesn't matter the genre. It's just in thrillers, it's a lot more obvious and a lot more important to the story. Because with a drama, plot twists don't always matter as much. They're not always trying to be hidden from the reader. It's like, okay, like there are some twists and turns, but if you can see them coming, it doesn't really impact your enjoyment of the story very much. Because it's not necessarily meant to be a shocking thing. It's more about the character development and the growth and the story itself rather than these surprises. In thrillers, it really is about the surprises themselves. So it makes it much more obvious and kind of more irritating in a way if you can guess plot twists, although I do really enjoy to guess them all the same. And it does take a lot to fool me when it comes to plot twists. Like, there are some that I don't guess, but when I read them, I'm still not shocked. But it takes a lot for them to really shock me. And I do want to say, Karen Slaughter has done that for me before. Triptych got me really good. So if you want a plot twist that's going to shock you, I recommend that book. I think a lot of my ability to guess plot twists comes from being a writer and studying writing in college. So I don't just look at books from a reader's perspective. I also look at books from a writer's perspective. I don't write as much anymore, but the underlying principle is still the same. I can kind of understand what needs to happen in a story to make it more satisfying for the reader. For example, if the mystery is a whodunit, and the big reveal at the end of the story is the identity of the killer is not going to be a stranger. They're not going to be a random character who's never been introduced before. They're going to be someone who was involved in the story, because otherwise that's not a satisfying ending, and readers aren't going to like that. If you spend the whole time with these detectives, whether they're like police detectives or private or just amateur, they're looking at clues to figure out who did the killing, and the killer is just some random dude off the street that they catch who hasn't been introduced before. That's not satisfying. That's not a good ending for a story. And like, that point in itself is fairly obvious, but it holds true for other aspects of the story as well. It's not a satisfying ending if there's no build-up, so there have to be clues. It's not satisfying if it turns out there was no mystery at all. So if they're questioning whether it was a suicide or a murder, you know pretty much 98% of the time it's going to be a murder, because otherwise that's not satisfying for the reader. As an author, generally the number one goal is to leave your characters satisfied, and that goes for any genre, not just thrillers. And there are different ways to leave your reader satisfied. An open ending can still leave a reader very satisfied. A book without closure can leave a reader satisfied. It does depend on taste to a degree. And this is of course not to say that writers follow this 100% of the time. There are books that don't have satisfying endings out there. Gone Girl is one of them, although I actually did find the ending rather satisfying. But Gone Girl surprised me in the end because it didn't go for an ending that would be stereotypically considered satisfying. But at the same time, a lot of people really hate the ending of Gone Girl because it's not satisfying. So there's kind of like a thin line there between you want to be surprising, you don't want to go the very generic route, but you can't be too unsatisfying in the end or readers aren't going to like it, because Gone Girl has a very divisive ending. A lot of people really hate it, but again, I really liked it. There are other books that are just subversive in nature, where they might do something like create a whodunit, and the killer is just a stranger walking in off the street. But when writers do that, they're often writing a very different book, and they're writing it with the purpose to be subversive. It's not a typical whodunit, and usually you can feel that in the narration very early on. It doesn't feel like you're actually going to discover the killer at the end. So I just want to say, like, this is not 100%. I don't guess every single plot twist. This is just kind of like my analysis of what I'm doing. And when I guess plot twists in thrillers, I'm not usually reacting to specific clues. Like when I went through The Good Daughter, I gave you all the evidence and how that led to my conclusion, but that's not how I experience it in the moment. I do pick up on some pieces, some details, but I'm not puzzling through the pieces like Sherlock Holmes is. I'm not taking three tiny little details and then creating something huge out of those details. I'm doing it more subconsciously. I look at the big picture of a story and I start gravitating towards what I consider satisfying. Like, what would be a generally satisfying ending for this? What would be a generally satisfying conclusion for this little mystery? And with The Good Daughter, as the example, the mystery in that was not obvious from the beginning. It's one of those books where you think you have the whole puzzle, but really what you have to do is figure out what piece is missing, because you know there has to be a mystery in there somewhere. It's not a thriller if you get all the information up front and you're just following these characters around. There are pieces missing. There's information that you don't have. And half of guessing the plot twist is figuring out what that information is. You can obviously use the Sherlock Holmes method, which I explained earlier in my example of The Good Daughter, where you take all the little details and figure it out from there. But I usually work in reverse. Whatever is missing, whatever piece of information you don't have, has to be used to make the story satisfying. If you know everything from the beginning, that's not a satisfying mystery. There is no mystery there. It's just action. And that's not good for a thriller. Like, there are definitely books where there is mostly just action. But for a thriller, there has to be some kind of mystery. There has to be some unknown. So someone is lying, or some assumed fact is wrong. And it's the stereotypical Sherlock quote. Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever is left, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. And that works here, because you have to eliminate the facts. You have to eliminate what is absolutely known. And this doesn't mean assumed, or something you think is to be true, or something the characters just all assume to be true. It has to be something that is absolutely proven for a fact, that you, the reader, are 100% sure about. And some of the things I look for in books from just like a story structure or a storytelling point of view, I look for someone who has a larger role in the story than their character necessitates. If they keep popping up and they're like contributing nothing throughout the book, there has to be a reason for their character to be there. And again, red herrings exist, but there has to be a reason that their character shows up so frequently. There has to be a reason that they're talking in a scene where they really have no business talking. There has to be a reason for their existence, because there's a reason for everything. I also look for specific facts that are probably true, that everyone assumes to be true, but haven't been proven yet. If something hasn't been proven in a thriller, then you cannot just assume that it's true. Even if it seems likely, even if it makes the most sense. It's a really easy way for authors to trick readers if everyone in the story just accepts something as a fact, even if it's not quite a fact. And then the last thing is just anything that seems irrelevant. I just instinctively look for things that don't belong, things that are random in the story. A piece of information, a fact. If someone gives out some random backstory that doesn't add up or doesn't make sense within the story, or it's like, why do you know this thing? That thing is probably going to be important later. It's the Chekhov's gun. If there's a gun on the mantle in Act 1, Scene 1, then it has to go off by Act 3, Scene 3. Like, that is what Chekhov's gun is. And it's very, very true. Like, not in a literal sense. If there's a gun, it doesn't have to be shot. But if you say something early in the book, if you make a big deal about something, it has to come into play later on in some way. And again, red herrings exist. That's something that you have to look out for as well. But just in general, if you look for things that don't belong, whatever doesn't belong is going to lead you to the right answer. Whatever you feel like would be a satisfying ending is going to lead you to the right answer. Not 100% of the time, but that's kind of what I always look for. Just whatever is instinctively satisfying and whatever doesn't belong. So I have no idea how interesting this is to anyone else. I really like analyzing things like this. I really like thinking about things like this, but I also don't know how I project this and how I'm coherent I am when talking about it. I tried to go by my notes. I tried to make notes that were very coherent and interesting, Let me know what you thought of this kind of video, and if you'd be interested in more videos like this, if you made it to the end at all, and if you have any ideas for anything like that that you would like to see. I know this isn't, like, super fascinating stuff, but it's what I think about when I read, and, like, when I'm unwinding from a book like The Good Daughter. I just kept thinking about, like, how I predicted it, and that itself was really, really interesting for me. Let me know down below if you're kind of like that as well, if you think about these kinds of things, or if I'm just the random weirdo on the internet who's talking to myself. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.